Hello, and this is a book review, interesting ideas that I found in this course, Effective Communication Skills by the Great Courses. So some interesting ideas I found, not necessarily quotes. Let's see. The first one is, one of the reasons we like to talk is to discover ourselves by seeing how others are referring to us and how we differ. So that's one of the reasons we talk, because by talking to other people, when I mean talking to other people, usually it could be right to talk to yourself. Usually we figure out things we haven't figured out before. So that's one of the reasons. Next, we unconsciously mimicking our counterparts' speech and its components. So when we talk to different people, usually we're unconsciously mimicking and changing ourselves and the way we speak when we speak to different people. We are striving for low effort and consistency. When we communicate, we strive to consistency and low effort. So we are not trying to use energy and overuse speech. Oftentimes, we use the unconscious brain to have a conversation which is somewhat automatic. And that's a little problem sometimes, because we got into automatic mode and sometimes we are not noticing what exactly is happening. So we're like in autopilot mode. We are constantly inferring. You need to believe something and then you will be able to see it. We'll talk a little bit more about that inferring. But when you see something, you will be able to see it. Only when you understand, only then you can see that in a conversation or when you communicate. We tend to use words such as always or never when describing someone or a behavior, which is an inference. That's where we go back to inference. And it's more yes or no. It's always or never when we describe someone or a behavior, that's what we infer. So we are constantly inferring about what's going on, about behavior or what's going on around us, and we're trying to understand what exactly is going on. Sometimes we associate emotions that happens in the environment to the person. So that's an interesting one. I forgot the examples exactly, but sometimes when we see the emotions, so let's say there's a lot of angry people around, we will ascribe it to the person even though he is not. So I'm not sure that's the best example, but that's the idea of this. Next, extroverts learn by speaking, while introverts think before they speak. That's the main differences between extroverts to introverts. So extroverts, they learn by speaking. That's the way they actually learn. And introverts, they think before, and that's why sometimes they don't speak as much, or they take more time to speak. But I find it interesting. Next, we have me versus I. Me is the social construct of self-imaging, while I is similar to a true self. So there is like a little differences between me and I. So me is the social construct. It's what we made, what we think of ourselves in a social context, while I is more of the way I talk to myself, or the way I describe myself to myself, if that makes sense. When introverts communicate with extrovert, using more feedback can help. So that's a little problem for both sides, because sometimes usually introverts, that's their problem, they don't give enough information. So giving more information could help in those interactions. Different attachment style will affect future relationship. I forgot all the relationship style, but there is a few of them, and that will affect future relationships. How do we handle when our self-esteem hurted? So there is like different people react differently when their self-esteem is being hurted, and finding your way will brighten your or help your communication style. We often use parental voices styles when communicating. I'll expand a little more about it. What's the parental styles or parental voices when communicating, but we often defer or default to those voices. Using the adult voice, which is also a parenting voice, what's happening here, that's one of the examples, is practical in managerial roles. Help rather than criticize. That's one of the parental voice. There is the adult voice. What is happening here is very good in managerial roles. But you need to be helpful and not criticize. So there is a few ways you can handle this situation, but try to be helpful rather than criticizing. The use of small talk is to check if a connection could be made, similar to an interview. That's I like this. Sometimes you go, I don't like to make small talk. Small talks are useless and this and that. Yes, there is a reason, because you're checking if the connection could be made. It's like some kind of like initial establishment of connection. Similar to an interview. I like that. It's like an interview. Is it working or not working? If it's not working, get out of there. And it's mostly, I would say it's mostly subconscious. Next, the recommended positive to negative beta ratio is 5:1, 5 good beads, which mean good beads, it's good interactions when you interact with someone. If you have the normal one, positive to negative ratio is 5:1. You have 5 good ones to 1 bad one. But if you have less than that, that's when the relationships start to have problems. I like this scale. It gives you like a little reference point. We often use control talk, which taught and imitated by our parents and is not very effective. So that's one of the parental voices. So we often use control talk, and that's what we being taught, and usually it's not a very effective one when you try to control the situation. Sometimes we need to use dialogue better than being right. So there is dialogue mode. Even if you know you're right, you need to understand how to solve the communication problem. So we need to use dialogue. Even if you're right, there is like a saying like, don't be right, be smart, something like that. Usually it's not helpful to be right. The fact you're right does not solve the problem. Sometimes you need to solve the problem. And I think it's really interesting because sometimes we forget, no, but I'm right. Yes, but solve the problem. Spider-Man once said, not to decide is deciding. I like this one. Sometimes you don't want to decide, you just decided. This is a little ironic. Try to avoid why, especially in beginning of a conversation, as it may imply attachment. So if you ask too many whys, you should try to avoid whys, especially in the beginning of the conversation, because it might have attachment. I don't remember exactly what that attachment means, but it gives a little breaks in the conversations. Questions in form of interrogation might miss the point. The better way is routing the other side to tell their story. There is two ways. So usually some people, when they try to like even to hear stories, they interrogate, but this is not the point. The better way is to route the other side, whoever tells that story or the situation, to give all the details or to tell their part of the story. So it's like you're juicing the information rather than giving a lot of questions, which is similar to that why thing we spoke here. Listen to the message rather than the messenger. Many people are, the messenger said something, or they care more about who is giving that message than the message itself. It happens a lot, it's some kind of a bias, but it's really important to actually hear the message itself think about it as you read it without the names and anything. No person ever said that, like you don't know the person. Next, aggressiveness versus assertiveness. So aggressiveness comes from anger, while assertiveness comes from problem solving. So I like this little distinction, which aggressiveness is actually anger. It's being aggressive, but being assertive, they're very similar. That's the thing, they're very similar, but it's actually a problem solving trait. Try to stay neutral and don't take sides. By repeating what the person wants in different words, you stay neutral. So in many situations, especially in managerial roles, you do not want to take sides because you will get in trouble both ways. Both sides, like one of them would not like it. So by not taking sides, so one of the good way of just repeating, the good way of doing that is repeating what the other person wants. It helps you to stay neutral. So you saying and this and that gives you, you don't take the side. You don't say, oh, you're right. You just repeat. Repeat the content of the other person, not the emotion. So when you do repeat, that's going along with this one we just said. So repeat the content and not the emotion. You don't have to, like if someone was very angry, you can also drop those words and just repeat the emotion. Do not repeat the emotion, repeat the actual content. So like the message, it's also about the message. Girls versus guys. When in a group, girls will discuss one of the girls' problem, while boys will jump from topic to topic and talk about what they're gonna do when they get out of here. It's just a little difference between how groups of guys, group of girls are behaving. So girls will discuss one of the girls' problem, while guys cannot stay constantly on one topic, and they were just like, okay, what were you doing when you get out of here? So it's some kind of a rebelness. I don't know exactly where it's come from, but it's interesting. While growing up, girls are encouraged to talk about their feelings, unlike guys. So in this culture, in general, I'm not sure all cultures, but some cultures, while growing up, girls are encouraged to talk about their feelings, unlike guys. Guys, they're not encouraged to talk about it, and therefore they're more connected, and guys are less connected to their emotions. Guys are using talk to solve problems rather than connecting, which girls use it for. So guys and girls, again, using talk for different, they have different objectives. Guys are using it to solve problems. Okay, so what were you? Oh, let's solve this problem. And girls are just connecting. Talking is connecting, not solving. So it's interesting to know that, because when you talk to different people, different genders, you need to understand that. When a woman asks, "Do you want to get a coffee?" and a man says no, the woman wants her offer to be considered, while a man feels he's just expressing his view and not enforcing. So that's a very good example about the differences between men to women. So the woman asks, "Do you want to get coffee?" and the man says no. The woman thinks, "Oh, he's enforcing his view," but this is not what the men do. He's not enforcing, he's just expressing his view, but the woman just wants to be heard. Or maybe she wants the man to ask her, "Do you want to get coffee?" or something like that. So she's trying to get something here, but the man is not, and there is like this miscommunication. The men do not like to ask something they don't know. They try usually to solve this problem by themselves. They do not like to ask someone, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." That's like hurt their masculinity. Of course, it's all generalization. I'm not going into this. That in general. Next, we learn a lot about ourselves from people that are close to us. Only people that are close to us will say certain things, because if you only interact with people that you don't know that much, they will not say certain things. They don't know you as much, and they probably won't feel as comfortable. So you'll learn more things. You'll learn things about yourself from people you know good. You know better. Two extroverts are not a good fit, as both struggle for talking time. So usually extroverts like to talk more. And when two extroverts are interacting, which is a little funny, they both struggle for talking time and they're not going to be a good fit. Usually they would not stay friends for long. And average people stay in love for about 2 years, just long enough to have a baby. Interesting. So the average time that people are staying in love, it's about 2 years, which is just enough to have the baby, raise it a little bit, just to have that baby. Next, talking about nothing means everything. I like this little phrase. Talk about nothing. It's a connection of some sort. So there is no problem. I'm a type of person that do not like too much to talk about random stuff about nothing. But talking about nothing means a lot, because just the fact that you can talk about nothing means you have some good chemistry, some good communication skills, and you're a good fit in some way. Unlike the white notion, employees' coffee breaks are actually productive, since eventually employees end up talking about work. So many places does not allow to a lot of people, a lot of employees, to take a break together because they think it's not productive. The thing is that it's actually beneficial. There is some studies, and what they found out that people actually end up talking because they don't have so much in common. So eventually people talking about work, which they always improve and try to help and change things and learn new things about the job. When talking to employees, it's highly important to not get into a fight or flight response. We need to stay in dialogue mode. Sometimes when talking to employees, they even when they scream or shout and they bring some, or they accuse you or whatever, as a manager, you do not want to get into fight or flight response. Usually it's going to be fight, unless you really don't like it, so you're going to get into flight. You need to try to stay in dialogue mode and try to solve the problem rather than deflecting or trying to get into a dispute. Do not. When dealing with difficult communication, we need to understand that it's not easy and to slow down. It's important to not fall for controlling speech. So sometimes there is some difficult communication, so we need to understand it might take time, slow it down, take it easy, and not fall for controlling talk, controlling speech, because as we saw, this is usually not very effective. I think that's the last one. When lettuce doesn't grow properly, we look for reasons. Same things with communication. Don't blame the person. Try to understand what's happening. I like this little analogy he brings. When lettuce doesn't grow or anything doesn't grow well, we try to understand why. But when we communicate, we do not. We just like trying to blame someone. But this is not the thing. Try to look at communication as lettuce, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. Trying to understand why it's happening, why things doesn't work, instead of getting upset and getting into control mode. Use dialogue mode. Those are the main things. Dialogue mode and controlling mode, right? That's the main thing. Anyway, that's it for notes. In general, this course, book, whatever you call it, it's pretty good. So I decided to give it 3 stars out of 5. And the reason is because there is some good interest, good value, good and interesting ideas in this book, course. But the problem is the professor and the way he talks is a little off. It was sometimes hard to follow him, and where exactly is he going? And it's also overblown in some places. So too much. They use too much. So it could be a little shorter. Overall, probably 3. I would probably maybe even 3.5, but it's not a 4. So that's where we are. That's pretty much it. Adios.